very true, in terms of what you were saying about Miami and in terms of, how people come and the changes, the evolutions that happen here. And that's really what rhythm is about. It's about these changes and the patterns that we find. And I'm glad that I could talk about rhythm today because it's vital. I mean, this is something that's extremely important. It's about time and place. It's about how we orient ourselves in the world and how we kind of find our footing. And that's interesting because without our devices, without our phones and maps, things like this, we're really lost. We can't find our way. So it's always a question of where are you? Where are we? Where are you really at any given point in time? If we had the ability to put on a jetpack and propel ourselves into the air 10 meters per second, it would only take us about a minute to be completely in the universe and to see the globe in full view. And it's interesting to kind of do this thought experiment because that's where we really are. We really are out here in the universe. We really are in space. And our time here on the surface of the earth is marked by how we mark that time and how we take account of ourselves within that space. And the way we do that is varied. We have, obviously the ancient ancestors, they followed the sun. We still do that. We have our attempt to kind of capture time, with our calendars. We're using that as a way to kind of get around our natural circadian rhythms, the rhythms that we all actually live by, plants and animals and ourselves. Obviously, we have circadian rhythms, and everyone's rhythm is unique in terms of how their day is split up and how they capture time. Interestingly, a lot of the way we document time is based on nature. This is a golden ratio. I know a lot of us in here are designers, and we're very familiar with this. Some of us may kind of eat by this, so to speak. I have a version of it as a tattoo, actually. It's important in terms of how we're constantly kind of marking time, and what comes from the golden ratio is repeated in nature. Obviously, it's the Fibonacci sequence. We see it everywhere. We see it in things that we like. We see it in things that we don't like so much, and we see it in the beauty of our lives. So for the musicians in the house, we have the circle of fifths. All of this is based on how we're breaking down notes and how those rhythms can be kind of restructured to create music. And this is another example of this pattern in the kente cloth. This is an example from Ghana, but we see this same kind of repeated pattern, creating a structure, creating an overall pattern that is somehow pleasing to the eye. One of the important sort of rhythms and ways that time is captured in the mind is that I'm focused on is memory. So for people who have learned languages and other learning, you know about the space time repetition, wherein there's a period of time where you remember everything that you've heard. I think it's about 20 minutes or so, and then after that, your memory of that content precipitously drops off. So my focus is memory in my work, because my work is all based on imagination, and imagination is fueled by memory. It's fueled by the things that we see, the things that we hear, these inputs, and they kind of go into the rhythm of my practice. So this is a quote from Bukowski, which is about, I kind of have used this as a guiding quote in some ways of my practice, and it's I'll just read it. If you're going to try, go all the way. Otherwise, don't even start. Right. This is his. It's a little bit crude, but it's a piece of a poem that's called "Go All the Way," and in it he's talking about his practice and the importance of consistency and how that consistency actually builds up a practice. So the way I do this is through sketching. I'm a drawer, I'm a sketcher, I'm somebody who's drawn and sketched all my life. As soon as I remember writing my memories of sketching kind of coincide with my memories of being able to write. So this constant drawing and doing so every day is a part of kind of how I mark time and how I orient myself in the world and how I kind of document, but also use the energy that I have because there's a lot going on frequently, and it's something that's very grounding for me to actually sketch and draw. So I included those two sketches as kind of glimpses into my sketchbook, and that's what these next few images will do. So it's kind of glimpses into my sketchbook. This is actually a sketch, and I included this one in particular because we see a lot of the abstract mark making and the sketch lines that sort of structure my paintings and my even the larger oil paintings. So this sketch is a good example because we can see both pieces, see work that's kind of more finished, and then see the underlying sketches that inform the work. The work is all spontaneous in that there's no model or anything like that. When I start these sketches, it's just kind of pulling from memory and putting the lines on the page. These are some of the larger works on oil. This is oil on canvas. This is a street scene. The title of this work is Increasing Odds by Trying, and it's just an example of kind of what you might see passing by people playing dice on the street. That's just what this image is about, really. And here's another image that's called Hoover's Son, and this is an oil painting. I had this in my second solo show with the gallery I work with, Spinello Projects in Miami. And this is, again, kind of almost a street scene. You see a person isolated in space, but the way that I construct a lot of these works is through this idea of proportion and kind of using rhythm and proportion in a way that kind of organizes the information on a page that helps a person, navigate the experience of the figure that's being presented in a way. So it's less of a pure visual conveyance. It's more of, hopefully, the conveyance of the actual experience in the work. This is a detail of one of my pieces, just again kind of showing the proportion, kind of showing how the shapes are working with the colors to create the overall work. This is another sketch, actually. This is a watercolor on paper piece. This also has gouache in it. This was from my first solo show that I did with the gallery. And this is a watercolor piece. It's called Seeing is Believing, or Believing is Seeing, right? And these two figures, kind of represent, an experience of someone. You can imply what's happening in the image by looking at it, but it could be, a variety of things, different types of events that these two are going into. But again, it's split up in a way, or the composition is in a way to kind of explain that experience. This piece is a work that I recently showed in a gallery show I had in Los Angeles called Measure My Diameter in Light Years. And this particular piece is calling to that idea about how we're floating in space, even though we're on the surface of the Earth, and this person is kind of caretaking her environment. And in this work, even though the person is standing, but the person there's movement here, and there's movement in the actual garment, and you can see based on the position that there's a future and there's a past in a way. So this person is kind of propelling through space and time in a way. This is a piece called These Bombs Have No Nutrients. It's about the famine and war that was going on in Yemen at the time. It's an abstract piece, and it's a landscape really, but you can see kind of the figures at the bottom of the work. This piece is another work where, focused on two figures in the nature, and really kind of thinking about the strokes and the brush strokes as showing movement and providing the idea of space and place, and hopefully trying to convey an idea of the relationship between these two individuals. This piece is called Lime and Sunshine. I view these, I really do view these as kind of like street scenes. These are just people like isolated in space. And this is actually a sketch. So this is a watercolor on paper piece. It's actually pretty large, that I just did in my studio recently. This is kind of an example of working out and sketching, but using more permanent materials, using ink here. This is another sketch from the sketchbook, actually. This is called Home is a Machine for Living, and it's about a person who's kind of in an environment that looks interior but also could be exterior, thinking about like a dreamscape and kind of a borderless environment, if you will. I wanted to include a few palettes. So these are actually just images of palettes in my studio. I think these are interesting to convey rhythm in a way that it's accidental, but it looks almost intentional, because we have the colors that are used in specific works. So the colors are kind of, there's a palette that makes sense in a way, but the organization of those colors is random. However, sometimes if we're able to isolate that, we can find these patterns and kind of use that. When I look for these patterns and find them, I'll try to use them in the work in some way, whether it's through the strokes or through the composition. This is a work that was shown at the show I had with the Rubels, kind of showing this idea of abstracting space to where we don't really know what these surfaces are that this person is in, or the environment that this person is in, but we can see that the person is kind of relaxing. This is called Brother, This Garden Is For You. This work was also in the show I had this spring in Los Angeles with Velmetter Gallery. This is a detail. I wanted to include some details to kind of show some of the brush strokes and show how some of the figures live within the environment and how the environment shapes the figures. And this is another palette. This work will be, this is a detail of this piece, but this work will be at the Convention Center during Basel next month with the Velmetter Gallery. I did these studies that kind of, with figures like this. I did a few, and this is one that will be featured there. Here's another palette from the studio. This is a boxer. This is, I like painting boxers because there's a lot of movement in the figure, and there's movement implied even when there's kind of stasis. So this idea of kind of capturing this inertia is very interesting within boxers, because even when nothing is happening, it's clear that something is about to happen. And there's this tension and buildup of tension, and it's fun to try to convey that in line and color and through form. This work was in my second show that I did with the Spinello Projects. The title of this is called Carrying Scalps of White Men in Prohibition Era, and this is about a thought experiment of how people might have reacted in times of terror, and then taking that action into the future, and then thinking about that in this context of like time travel. So I like to do this thing where I'm like collapsing time and space and flattening the ideas, not only in the concepts of the work, but also in the visual representation as well. This work is called Overseer, 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 or Overseer, Overseer, Officer, rather. And this is in the collection at the ICA, Miami. This work will also be in Art Basel. This is, I wanted to include this to kind of really show patterns and show my attempt to use these forms from nature in the work. I mean, as a painter, it's a constant attempt to, well, I think some painters are rendering actual life. What I want to render is experience in a way and convey, experiences, and through that, of course, borrow from nature. So, I'm not watching anyone or looking at particular plants when I paint this. So, don't ask me what the leaf is or anything like that. But these are just kind of, this is my interpretation of the inspirations that I see on a daily basis. This work is called Choosing to Transcend, because the other options were A, rotting from the inside, or B, rotting from the outside. And this was in the NSU show. It's in watercolor on paper. And I want to sort of wrap up with some install shots. So this was from my second show at Spinello Projects, which was called Only Touching the Ground to Jump. So it's interesting to think about rhythm in the individual, it's interesting to think about rhythm and kind of composition in individual works and sub works. So a lot of times when I'm painting, and I showed you some of the details, I'm almost thinking about certain pieces of the painting as sub compositions, and kind of these sub compositions obviously make up the larger work. And when these works are together, we can kind of see even a grander or more grand interplay between these compositions. So it's like you kind of have a syncopation between the works, and there's rhythm in that as well. So I wanted to show that through these works. This is from a group show that's closing up soon in Sydney, Australia. And this is showing some of those works that I mentioned. I did a series of these night beach scenes with individuals. And this is the show at NSU, where we kind of see this interplay between the individuals and the landscape within the same space together here. And I think I just wanted to close with this piece from Wes Montgomery, who's my favorite rhythmic jazz guitarist. And the closing point or encouragement through this is to find the rhythm. I usually like to close with like 3 key points, but here I really think there's one, and it's find the rhythm. There's rhythm in our daily lives. There's a way to find rhythm in your practice in terms of keeping the consistency and maintaining a consistent practice and doing your work in a way where the practice feeds itself. So it's interesting, like this is like a side note, but the point of this, thinking about like when designers talk about the golden rule and how the golden ratio rather, and how it's split up, that the thing is when you have each of those proportions, that becomes the basis for another system in and of itself. So it's like you have this kind of self-creating system in the actual design. And that's a way to look at the practice in terms of consistency, such that each kind of iteration of your work should fuel the next iteration of the work. And that's kind of how I look at my practice and the importance of consistency and rhythm within it. Thanks.